مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. قد لا يعجب الديمقراطيين المنتشرين في أمريكا سن رئيسهم، ولكنهم بدأوا يعتادون على فكرة انتخابه مجددا كرئيس للبلاد في عام 2024. هذا الرجل هو نفسه الذي تم انتخابه لأول مرة في مجلس الشيوخ عندما كان سعر غالن البنزين 36 سنتا فقط. الديمقراطيون ليسوا متحمسين لانتخاب بايدن، ولهذا تابعت على كل من المرشحين الآخرين في الانتخابات. على سبيل المثال، يتم اختيار ثلث أعضاء مجلس الشيوخ في انتخاباتنا الوطنية كل عامين. سيكون أمام الديمقراطيين مهمة صعبة في انتخابات عام 2024، وهي الدفاع عن 23 مقعدا من أصل 33 مقعدا متنازع عليها. هذا يعني أنه هناك ضغط إضافي على الديمقراطيين للاحتفاظ بالأغلبية القليلة، وإلا سيخسرون مجلس الشيوخ كما خسروا مجلس النواب في عام 2022. ماذا بعد البيت الأبيض، وكيف يخطط الديمقراطيون للانتخابات 2024؟ هل لديهم مجموعة من المرشحين الجذابين وتنافسيين؟ هل لديهم خطة لضخ الحماسة في حملاتهم الوطنية؟ لمناقشة الخطط الديمقراطية المبكرة لعام 2024 يسرني أن أستضيف ثلاثة من أذكى الخبراء السياسيين في واشنطن: Peter Fenn, Steve Clemons, وألين Godfrey. Welcome back to Dakhel Washington. Donald Trump and his legal troubles are sucking all the oxygen out of political commentary these days, but there's a lot of interest still in what's going on the other side of the aisle, as President Biden is beginning his re-election campaign, and the Democrats are gearing up for the 2024 presidential and congressional election. To discuss how the Democrats are faring, what their strategy is looking like, and what the challenges they have to overcome will be, I'm delighted to welcome Elaine Godfrey and Peter Fenn. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. All right, we're 16 months out from the election. Let's take a look at the Democratic strategy from the top down. First, presidential. Peter, if you're the president's campaign manager today in June of 2023, how are you feeling?
Well, I tell you, I'm feeling a little queasy here because it looks like the Republicans are on the one hand self-destructing, but you don't know who the heck you're going to be running against, and real possibility that Donald Trump is going to make lemonade out of these lemons, all the indictments that he's seeing, and I honestly think that as the campaign manager, if I was, on the one hand, I think that Donald Trump probably would be the easiest person to beat in a general election, more so than a lot of the other candidates in there. But, you know, you got to run your race. You got to be aggressive. You got to tell your story. You got to be out there on the positive side. As you've noticed, no one's talking about these indictments in the White House. You can't get a leaked word out of any of them, basically. So, so it's going to be one rock and roll race.
So, Elaine, Peter just said that Donald Trump would probably be the preferred Republican candidate if you're Joe Biden. But there's at least a reasonable chance that with indictment after indictment after indictment, New York, Georgia, Florida, whatever, that Donald Trump isn't the candidate. So all these indictments aren't necessarily good news if you're Joe Biden, are they?
Right. I mean, you would think in a normal situation, your number one opponent in the other party being indicted repeatedly for various like outlandish crimes would be good news. Might not be good news for Joe Biden. You know, I guess right now I'm of the opinion that Donald Trump is rubber and all of this stuff is somehow going to bounce off of him and not affect his chances. Like Peter said, he'll make lemonade out of it somehow. But yeah, it could end up knocking him out in you know, somehow. Maybe Biden goes up against someone like Ron DeSantis. That would be more challenging, I think. Ron DeSantis is seen as a little more sane than Trump, maybe a little more strategic, better at politics, although maybe not retail politics, as we've seen. He's not the most charming guy. So yeah, I think it would be, that's still definitely an open possibility.
Well, speaking of charming guys, I'm delighted to welcome Steve Clemons to the show. Thank you for joining us, Steve.
My pleasure.
Right now, you know, put aside the potential Republican challengers, Joe Biden has two primary challengers, Marianne Williamson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, neither is a traditional politician. RFK Jr. Just got the endorsement of the founder of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, who not only endorsed him, but said he's going to be the next president. Is this really the stiff competition that Joe Biden is going to face in the Democratic Party?
No, of course not. I mean, I hate to say, look, and any American citizen grows up with the idea that he or she might eventually be president. It's one of the things we instill in elementary school kids. But along the way, there's a lot of winnowing out of credible possibilities. And even though Robert F. Kennedy comes from a very, very distinguished family who has dominated a substantial portion of the Democratic Party, Robert F. Kennedy's views on vaccinations and kids and just a whole lot of wacky theories. Now, remember, Jack Dorsey, founder of Twitter, very interesting guy, brilliant, but not necessarily brilliant politically. He had a lot of problems himself with Washington, D.C., and he spent a lot of his life recently in Africa. So I wouldn't say he's necessarily in touch. Marianne Williamson is interesting because she represents a kind of different portion of the political left, a fringe left. You know, I look at her as someone who could be serious in a different universe, but not this one. And I think that she, you know, she represents a lot in the environmental movement. She's in this, but she ran before, she lost before, she's going to lose again, and probably not break above 1%.
So, Peter, if this is what Democratic presidential politics will be for the next year, how do you avoid the complacency problem, the lack of enthusiasm problem among the voters that the Democrats are going to need to get to the polls if they're going to defeat any Republican?
You know, it's a very, very good question. And I think the most important thing that Democrats can do is keep their eye on the ball here, focus on the Republicans. Don't worry about the Democrats. There are going to be no Democratic debates. Marianne Williamson is not going to be on the stage this time, nor is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. going to be on the stage. So this is immediately a general election problem. And so what I think that this administration is doing is focusing very strongly on the successes that they've had, on the turnaround of the economy, on what Biden has done. And then I think also an interesting part of this strategy is that the president and vice president are going to run as a team. And you saw this in the announcement video. Vice President Harris was featured. They want her out front on especially issues like abortion, on women's rights, on exciting the base of African-American voters. And they are also going to make her, I think, a real serious vice president, more serious than she may have been in the early part of this administration because of the age factor. And they want to make sure that doesn't come back too much to.
So,
harness.
Steve, is this
I
a
mean, Elaine may
sound
have
strategy in your view?
Elaine may have different. Look, what I was going to say, I was going to add on. I agree with Peter Finn. That's what they're going to do. But I actually think that's giving stomach ulcers to, rank and file Democrats who basically, and it's giving an opportunity as Republicans see it, say, you're not really voting for Joe Biden. You're voting for Kamala Harris. How do you feel about that? And a lot of Democrats are not comfortable with that choice. And so when you kind of look at other potential Democratic contenders, let's just say for a minute, a tragic thing happens, that Joe Biden were to have a fall, kind of like Mitch McConnell did, and be knocked out of commission for a few weeks. There are people sharpening their knives, waiting for lightning to strike, to be that person to step in and will challenge, in my view, Kamala Harris and create an enormous amount of tension inside the Democratic Party. I think it's a mistake to think a handoff or a unity ticket that kind of elevate the seriousness and gravitas of Kamala Harris actually is something that the whole Democratic Party is ready to wrap around. So I agree with Peter what's going to happen. I'm not sure that the Democratic Party, and a big chunk of it, is going to like it.
But Elaine, is there a solution for this? I mean, Joe Biden can't wake up tomorrow, throw Kamala Harris off the ticket without upsetting enormous constituencies within the party.
Right. I mean, he's between a rock and a hard place here. I mean, I think that's right. That's what they're going to do. But I hear all the time on the trail from Republicans, from Trump supporters, our country's one heartbeat away from a Kamala Harris presidency. They really don't they obviously don't like her, but I think that there's real resonance with that message for Republicans and even for a lot of swing voters. They don't like her. She appeals to the base of the Democratic Party, but not to a lot of swing voters. I think it's a tough position for him to be in, especially because the 2020 campaign, Biden was able to sort of keep a low profile. There was a pandemic raging, and this is different. He's going to be out. He's going to be walking and speaking and, glad handing. She'll be with him, which will help soften the image, I think, a little bit, or youthen up the image. But I think that that's going to be a real issue. Yeah, I don't know if there's a way out of it other than just really hammering on his successes, on, the fact that Biden did what he said he'd do, right? He calmed things down. I think he's going to talk about that a lot, or as much as possible.
Peter, you want to get in?
One quick final point. Never in our history in the last 100 years has the vice president played a role in the election. I mean, we all think it's gonna. Dan Quayle was supposed to be a disaster for George Bush. Didn't make any difference. Some could say, gee, did Al Gore help Bill Clinton? Maybe, but it was fine. Did Lyndon Johnson deliver Texas for President John F. Kennedy? Yeah, but he would have won anyway. I mean, there's pluses and minuses, but in this case, I think that both my compatriots here are right, and that, would you like to have a situation we didn't even have to bother with it and discuss it? Sure. But, if so, if not, you gotta go with what you got. So
you got to go with what you got. All right. We're going to come back after the break and talk about the other elections that will happen in 2024. 435 Congress people, a third of the Senate, control of the legislative branch of American government. All that after the break. Again, my guests today include Elaine Godfrey. Elaine is politics reporter at The Atlantic, one of America's leading magazines of news and ideas. A native of Iowa, she has also written for Real Clear Politics and New York Magazine. Joining us from somewhere in the middle of Europe is Steve Clemons. Steve is the founding editor-at-large for Semaphore, an international news site. Previously, he was at The Hill, The Atlantic, New America Foundation, and the Nixon Center for Peace and Freedom. And joining us from New England is Peter Fenn. Peter's a Democratic strategist who has contributed advice and ideas to more than 300 campaigns, from City Hall all the way to the White House. He was executive director of the Center for Responsive Politics and is an adjunct professor at George Washington University. All right, Elaine, we're talking about the White House and the election of 2024, but there's a whole other set of elections on the ballot, all of Congress, all of the House, a third of the Senate. How does the White House connect with that set of elections? Who in the party, who in the White House keeps these different priorities in mind, re-electing the president and trying to win back Congress?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I mean, a lot of these seats are in, there's a few seats for the Senate in swing states where it'll be interesting how much they want to talk about Biden and talk about their relationship with Joe Biden, whether Elissa Slotkin, for example, wants Biden coming to Michigan to campaign for her for the Senate. But they will be talking a lot about, the things that Biden has done, manufacturing jobs, stabilizing the economy, that kind of thing. I think abortion will be a huge issue for a lot of these candidates in the House, but also in the Senate. There aren't very many open seats. I think that there are only one or two this cycle, and only one maybe in a swing state, in a place that's actually competitive. Most Democrats are in a defensive posture. So that's an interesting sort of dynamic that we have. Usually we have some more open seats. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they tie it together, how they, how much Ruben Gallego leans into the Joe Biden connection when he's running against Kyrsten Sinema in Arizona, for example.
All right, before we hit the Senate, Peter, let me ask you about the House, the U.S. House of Representatives. Democrats did a lot better in 2022 than most experts expected. Do Democrats think they can actually win back the House in 2024?
Absolutely, they do believe they can win the House. There are 18 Republicans that are in districts that Joe Biden carried. There are only 5 Republicans that 5 Democrats that are in districts that Donald Trump carried in 2020. So there's a big advantage there. This latest Supreme Court decision in Alabama really means that you're going to have more African Americans who have a shot at becoming members of Congress. They're Democrats. That could be anywhere from 3 to 5 seats there. You've got only 5 seats difference. George Santos, who thinks he is Winston Churchill, is dead. He's gone. He's bye-bye. And that seat should go Democratic. So, it's not a slam dunk by any stretch, but I think what's happening with the Republicans and the Freedom Caucus and the disagreements and the chaos is going to help the Democrats in the House this time.
Interesting. Steve, do you agree with this? Democrats have a reasonable chance of winning back the House?
I do, and I think the biggest reason is, and I'm sure that my colleagues here may disagree, but the Democrats largely, while they have a great story to tell, they're pretty crappy at telling it.
All right, you have to humor me here. I know we're 16 months out, but Peter, Elaine, Steve, who is going to control Congress after the 2024 election? Peter.
I think the Democrats will. I think they will have the House, and I think they will narrowly hold on to the Senate.
Elaine.
I think I have to say the same. I think especially with the Supreme Court case, that was good news for Democrats.
And
I think Democrats will control the House and they will lose the Senate.
Okay, fascinating. We have it on the record. We're going to come back with all of you, maybe before then, but certainly after the election, and celebrate which one of you is right. Steve Clemons, Elaine Godfrey, Peter Fenn, thank you all very much for joining me this week on Dachau, Washington. With all the focus on Donald Trump's mounting legal troubles, the Democrats are getting very little attention. Perhaps that makes sense. After all, they are the incumbent party. And during a time of peace and reasonable economic news, when the sitting president wants to run for a second term, there is usually very little drama about him getting the nomination. This time is a little different, however. Mostly that's because the incumbent is the oldest president in American history, and he's asking voters to keep him in office until he is 86 years old. Combine that fact with the relative lack of popularity of his vice president, which really isn't fair because vice presidents are never very popular. And the effort by this incumbent to run for another term is garnering a bit more unease than usual. Enter Robert F. Kennedy Jr., son of the beloved Democratic hero, a senator and former attorney general who was gunned down by an assassin in June 1968 while himself campaigning for president, and nephew of perhaps the most popular Democratic president since Franklin Roosevelt, who himself was killed by an assassin in 1963 in one of the darkest days in American history. This Kennedy, Robert F. Jr., launched his own campaign for the Democratic nomination for president, taking on Biden. What a sad moment this is for a family that has given so much and has suffered such immense tragedy along the way. That's because this Kennedy is so different than his father, than his Uncle Jack, or his Uncle Ted, who himself ran a principled, though losing effort for the party's nomination against another incumbent, Jimmy Carter, in 1980. This Kennedy, Robert F. Jr., is a conspiracy theorist, a vaccine denier, a purveyor of wild ideas and crazy theories that would be bad enough if he kept to himself, but are dangerous because he uses his name to impact the thinking of people who take the Kennedy label seriously. Well, don't take my word for it. In May 2019, his sister, a former lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland, his brother, a former congressman, and his niece, who directs Georgetown University's health initiatives, together wrote a newspaper column denouncing him for spreading dangerous misinformation about the measles vaccine. Quote, Robert F. Kennedy, they wrote in Politico, is part of this campaign to attack the institutions committed to reducing the tragedy of preventable infectious diseases. He has helped to spread dangerous misinformation over social media and is complicit in sowing distrust of the science behind vaccines, end quote. That's what they said about their brother and uncle. And it got even worse when coronavirus took over the world the following year. If you go to RFK's presidential campaign website, you will see an embarrassment. From healthcare to Ukraine, he has views that are warped by conspiracies, seeing demons where none exist, and holding America responsible for virtually all the ills of the world, real and imagined. Now, I love the fact that in America, any girl or boy can grow up to run for president. Sure, it helps if your name is Roosevelt or Bush, but we've had Eisenhowers, Clintons, and Obamas too. But it is a sad coda to one of America's great tragic tales that this nephew of a president, son of a would-be president, is carrying the family name into battle again. The Kennedys deserve better, and the rest of America deserves better too. وصلنا إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كان لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول البرنامج وبالأخص بشأن الصلة بين الحملة الرئاسية والحملة التشريعية في انتخابات 2024 تواصلوا معي رجاء عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو تراسلوني مباشرة على الرابط @RobSatloff. إلى اللقاء في الأسبوع القادم، حتى ذلك حين شكرا وإلى اللقاء.